Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we are back. I'm here with Jackie Bally, Samantha Merritt, and our mayoral candidate, Bill King. So welcome back. We were talking about infrastructure, and of course, one of your campaign things is get back to basics. Tell us what that looks like.
Well, we organize municipal government for basically two things, and that's to build the infrastructure out and to provide public safety. And the city's doing a pretty terrible job on both of those right now. The streets we talked about earlier, there's all kinds of problems with flooding, as we've seen recently. There's also tremendous problems with our wastewater treatment system, which you're going to be hearing more about in the near future. But on the public safety side, we now have a burglary every 15 minutes in this city. And yet the Houston Police Department reported last year that they only solved 8% of the burglaries. We were proclaimed the robbery capital of the world robbery capital of the United States a couple of weeks ago by the Houston Chronicle, and yet the Houston Police Department reports that they only solved 20% of the robberies that are committed. Those numbers are not acceptable. And if criminals know that they have got a 92 or 80% chance of getting away with it, what's the deterrent?
No,
well,
I can tell you from personal experience, I was broken into recently, and nothing was done about it. Not a pin was even lifted with regard to a report or anything.
Now that's a fairly common experience for Houstonians right now, and the problem is it raises the anxiety. I mean, if you feel like nothing's going to happen, then people become more fearful of crime, and part of the problem with public safety is the perception of how we feel about it. And we had this horrific crime where the fellow that owned the Cadillac dealership down in Midtown was coming back from a night on the town, and he was ambushed in his garage and killed as he was going back into his house. That makes people think, well, maybe I shouldn't go out. And then that makes the restaurants not as full. I mean, this is a very dangerous spiral that you head down, and we've seen it in some of the big cities in the East and the Midwest.
Well, speaking of unacceptable, I'm switching on you. Let's go back to potholes, because I think these potholes are unacceptable. And we passed a drainage fee a couple of years back, and it was supposed to address our infrastructure issues, and it's not. And I want to get your opinion on this, because I'm getting pretty mad about all this.
Yeah, so you're talking about the Rebuild Houston program, and it was
you could tell I'm not a fan.
It was a flawed model from the beginning. The revenue model didn't work. We set up this new drainage fee that we're not collecting as much as we thought. There are tremendous costs associated with it. We went to this pay-as-you-go model, which was supposed to be some kind of a conservative idea, but everybody told us it wouldn't work at the time, and sure enough, it's not worked. Because you end up with those projects costing so much more by the time that you build them, you'd be much better off to borrow the money and do them up front. Mm-hmm. But here's what Rebuild Houston was really all about, if you want to know the truth of the matter. For 180 years in this city, we did infrastructure projects in a certain way. We had bond elections, and in those bond elections, the voters got to decide which projects were going to be done and how much money was going to be spent on those projects. Rebuild Houston was an effort to turn all that decision-making process over to a small handful of engineers and bureaucrats so they could make those decisions behind closed doors at City Hall and take it away from the voters. Anytime somebody tells you, I want to take the politics out of something, run the other direction, because what they're telling you is we really don't want the people to have a vote on these things. Well, of course, we now know the Supreme Court yesterday ruled that the ballot language was misleading as a matter of law, and so we now have this whole thing up in the air on top of not getting anything done. So this has just been a disaster. This has done more to set back the development of infrastructure in this city than anything else in the city's history.
So what does that ruling really mean? I mean, now that they're saying the language was not acceptable or whatever they just said, does that mean that the actual program is we can't enforce it? We weren't really doing it anyway, but does it mean we have to go back and reword it and then put it back to the voters? What does that mean?
And what happens in the interim with the money that has been raised and what's happening?
Well, that's all. Those are all great questions, and nobody knows the answer to them. What it almost certainly means is the charter amendment's going to go away, because when you look at what the court said, they're going to end up saying that the election was invalid, which means that the charter amendment that we passed was invalid. But here's the ironic thing, and this is the position that the city took yesterday. they're saying that they're entitled to assess and collect the drainage fee regardless of what the election outcome was, because they have that power under state law. So you could end up with really the worst of all possible worlds. You could end up with a drainage fee in place, but without any of the protections about how the money was supposed to be spent that were included in the charter amendment.
Is there any oversight or accountability on these funds at all?
There is a committee that's called an oversight committee. Their name was later changed to an advisory committee. And basically all these decisions now are made in Public Works about what projects are going to be prioritized. And now let me just give you an example of the kind of thing that goes on down there. So we're scheduled under the current CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, to widen Gessner in 2017 and 2018. Now, I've driven down Gessner recently. It's a perfectly good street. If you widen that street, you're going to have to take out, many, many mature trees. You're going to take out people's front yards. It doesn't need to be widened. And the people in that area are adamantly opposed to it being widened. Mm-hmm. So why are we doing that project as opposed to going out and fixing the streets in Garden Villas where you can barely drive down the streets? But somebody at City Hall's making those decisions as opposed to having to go to the voters and asking them, we want you to support a bond election, and here's the projects we're going to do. If you're afraid to go to the voters, then there's something wrong with what you're doing.
Well, I always say follow the money. So there's some incentive there that people are making these decisions, and I guess nobody knows.
Well, Memorial Green has been paused, recently too. They've changed they've put the lot restrictions down, so how many townhouses can be built in that area and such. But they're still going to put up all those multi-use business.
Okay, Bill. So you're elected tomorrow. What changes would you make in Public Works?
Well, I think it needs to be sort of just turned upside down and start all over. I mean, anybody in this town that's in the construction business or building business knows how difficult it is to get building permits out of the city of Houston. It's a universal complaint, everybody you talk to, and it's just not service friendly. And I think it's a leadership personnel issue. But on top of that, I think we need to go back to the model that worked for 180 years. We need to go back to having bond elections and have people vote on what projects are going to be done in what order and how much money we're going to spend on those projects. We need to get back to letting the people decide what infrastructure we need, not engineers and bureaucrats.
Yeah, and of course, talking about we've talked to every person who's in city council now and people who are seeking that office about the permit process, because it has really gotten to be a quagmire down there, and that I'd like to see something done like day one.
Even researching, from my position, even researching information that's going on in Houston. There's a lot of people that don't have the software that I have. I can look at GIS formats, but just to understand where the growth is and what is happening is almost impossible. And that should be public information. It should be readily accessible to us. That's our tax dollars.
Do you think you just have a lot of apathy with voters, and they just say you can't fight City Hall, so we're just they just capitulate?
Well, when you have situations like what happened yesterday where, the people voted on this, the Supreme Court comes in and says that the election was invalid, and the mayor basically says, well, it doesn't really matter, we're going to do what we want to anyway, I think that does cause voter apathy. And one of the problems is in recent city elections, the voter turnout's been about 15 or 20%, and that's just abysmal. But I'm going to tell you, traveling around on the campaign trail, I sense something different's going on in this election. I hear people I think are a lot more concerned about the direction of the city. And, the thing that they talk about a lot are the potholes that they drive across. But, of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the immediate manifestation.
That's the systemic, how it visualizes.
Of the financial problems we've got and the management problems we've got. And I think you're going to see a much higher turnout this time because I think people are genuinely concerned about the direction the city's going.
For political junkies like me, this is a fascinating race because you have like 1 million people running. I think the only people not running are the rest of us in this room. And so let me ask you from a political standpoint, because I've always said that you have a certain defined base more so than your opponents. And I think that's going to be key to getting you in the runoff. How do you see your path getting to victory? Do you see it the same way, or do you feel that you have a defined base more than your opponents? How do you feel that you distinguish yourself enough from the voters to get into the runoff and become the next mayor?
Well, certainly various groups in town are inclined to vote different ways. But I have to tell you, when I go around and talk about potholes, And when I talk about, the police department only solving 8% of the burglaries, when I talk about the fact that the city hasn't balanced its budget in 15 years, notwithstanding we've been going through the biggest oil and gas boom in my lifetime, when I talk about the fact that we're now $20 billion in debt, which is more than Detroit owed, by the way, when it filed bankruptcy, I find that resonates with people from every political persuasion, every background, every ethnicity. I mean, there's nobody that's in favor of potholes. There's nobody in favor of burglars. And there's nobody in favor of their property taxes going up. Yeah. And we've just seen these taxes and fees go up so dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. And I just think people are fed up with it.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is an awareness issue, but it's not an issue unless it becomes an issue for you. And so once it's something like they get burglarized, or they ruin their brand new Porsche on that pothole and broke the front axle, and then it becomes an issue for them.
Right, but those of us that don't drive Porsches, if we had a better structure for mass transit, then that would probably alleviate some of the wear and tear that's on the roads as well.
Yeah, I think that look, Metro's ridership is down significantly. We need to do a better job in that area. This is fortunately, unfortunately, in Viewpoint, is going to be a rubber tire system because we're so spread out. It's the only thing that you can do economical. The park and ride system is a good system. It could be expanded and could be enhanced so we get more riders there. But let me tell you, you're talking about the guy with the Porsche hitting the pothole. I was talking to a lady the other day who was a school teacher that hit a pothole, taking her kids to school, single mom, and it made all of them late to school, so she had to go in and write and everything. And then the real problem is, she didn't have the $500 to go get her car fixed. For working families, this is not just an inconvenience. This can be a financial crisis in their lives. And for the city to be standing by and not doing anything about it and creating that risk is just not fair.
Yeah, and there's really no recourse from the city either, because I know people who have tried. They've hit a pothole, bent their rims, and they're looking at $500 would be cheap. They're talking about 2 brand new tires. That alone is probably $500, and then 2 new rims or something.
And the
like
loss
that
of time,
And so it's it sounds kind of silly about talking about potholes, but it is a big issue. But again, it's systemic of what's wrong with the city. It's that we're not putting our money where it should go. Well, you know what? We're coming up against a break again. Time flies when you're having fun. So we will be right back.